Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Business Talk Library. And today I have another great guest on because I think that it is always great to think about entrepreneurship and the impact that it has. But I think it's also equally as great to have the chance to talk to the people who work, whether it be on the public service side or for private organizations that are helping to keep that entrepreneurial engine rolling. So today I have a great guest on, and we're going to talk about, his journey with that and what the organization he's currently working with, what they're doing to help keep that entrepreneurial engine in North Carolina rolling, because it's something that really makes a huge difference for our community to make it a better place to live and enjoy and a better place to work and grow a business. So welcome to the show, Kevin Dick.
Terrell, thank you so much for having me. The Business Talk Library is a phenomenal opportunity for Carolina Small Business Development Fund to talk a little bit more about what we're doing to strengthen small businesses, to stabilize them especially in the midst of this pandemic, but then hopefully beyond, whenever that is.
Absolutely. And before we jump right into that, tell us a little bit about kind of, your background and just, the journey you've been on to get to the position that you're in now.
Sure. So I'll try to keep this to the Reader's Digest version. Um, but native of northern New Jersey, grew up in a town called Montclair, which is about a half hour from New York, and um, ended up doing undergraduate work at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And I was an international business major. That was where I knew I was going to make my mark on the world. If anybody follows, or I'll date myself a little bit, but I'm a child of 80s pop culture to some degree. So there was a show that used to be on in the 80s called Family Ties. And I was convinced that I was going to be the black Alex P. Keaton. I was going to be an international business magnate. That was partly fueled by the fact that I'm a first generation American. My family is from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm actually the last of four kids, and the one who was actually born in the States. So, but that sort of international upbringing was always and remains today a big part of who I am. And so international business drew me. And then when I graduated, I started working in marketing and sales. I did work for an international importer, so that was probably a far more domestic job than an international one. But I guess that was kind of the hook to the studies that I had been involved with at Georgetown. What I realized during that, say, 2 to 3 years right after graduation, was that I was kind of bored, and I didn't feel like I was challenging myself in marketing and sales, even though my career was going pretty well. And I started being restless, like, what's the next move? What should I be doing? What could I be doing to better help communities? And one of the things that really fueled that as well was the fact that I was doing a lot of marketing and sales in low income communities of color. And I would drive around those communities and see the potential in that burned out building, or that building that had, uh, windows with bullet holes, or windows that were shot out, or vacant lots around them. I started seeing the potential in these places, and but I was lost. I didn't know. I was like, well, how could I do something that's beyond even volunteerism? I did engage in volunteerism, but how could I do something where I could make a living and not necessarily be broke, but also help the community? And so a friend of mine brought me an article on something called community and economic development. Like I said, I was a business major. I had no idea what that term meant. But when I read it, I read this article, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So then maybe another week or two go by and I say, all right, well, how does one go about entering this career field, community and economic development, the whole notion of helping communities maximize their economic power by helping to grow small businesses, by helping to implement, administer job training programs so people can go back to work. How does someone get into that field? And so that same friend then brought me an article and said, all right, if you want to go into community and economic development, you either have to get a master's in public administration or you have to get one in urban and regional planning or city and regional planning. And I thought urban and regional planning sounded a lot more cool than public administration. So that was the basis of my, you know, first career defining moment. I'm going to pursue this master's degree in something called urban and regional planning. And a variety of circumstances led me to pursue that in South Florida. And so I moved down to the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, Broward County to be specific. Um, those who we just finished an election, so those who remember the 2000 election may remember Broward County for that reason.
Yeah.
But but lived in Broward for 9 years, and really my intention actually was to get that degree. I had some family down there. My mother we had just lost my dad, and my mother was thinking about re-retiring back to Trinidad and Tobago. So I wanted to make sure she was transitioned properly, and I was in a position to move. So I moved, and I went to grad school down there. And my plan was just to really transition her back and then head back up north. Florida was a little bit too hot for me, but South Florida anyway. What I realized and what actually happened is that I ended up spending 9 years there, finding my bride, working for two different local government organizations, and really having my career start to blossom in community and economic development. First for a local government, where I served as an assistant to the city manager, and then um, as assistant director and director of operations for a workforce development board. And so did that for 8 years and really learned a lot about public administration and about how to infuse resources into communities that need it. Um, and so then fast forward to the mid 2000s and this whole the right just pre Great Recession. And what I tend to believe is that the housing issues and just the housing bubble really hit places like the so-called Sun Belt areas of the country before they hit the rest of the country. So South Florida would be one of those, Arizona, Nevada, parts of California. You had these places where there was so much home speculation from the late 90s into the mid 2000s. You had the dot-com boom. You had a number of people basically buying property that they couldn't really afford to finance. And sooner or later, that is going to come to a head. And it came to a head in South Florida in 2005, where the average home prices, if you looked at the late 90s, were, maybe 150,000. And then by the mid 2000s, they were 360,000 in Broward County. And so seeing that and seeing, wanting to get a good housing for the money and so forth, read up on the Research Triangle in North Carolina, and said, hey, this area seems to really be growing economically, and there seems to be a lot of vibrancy there. There's universities, there's HBCUs, there's also some other big time research institutions in addition to the HBCUs. We should think about there, and we decided to move to the Research Triangle, and like I said, started doing some consulting, but eventually landed a position with the city of Durham, doing some things similar to what I had been doing in South Florida. And I ended up staying there for 10 years, was then recruited to the city of Charlotte to do some similar work in economic development, and then had this opportunity earlier this year to be the president and chief executive officer for the Carolina Small Business Development Fund, and really do what I'm passionate about, trying to create equity in underserved communities by helping the small businesses there grow, providing them with the business advising and technical assistance they need in order to thrive long term.
Mhm.
So, been at this now for 10 months. I started the job on February 10th.
Okay.
Um, and a month and a half later, we were all out of the office. So, fortunately, I didn't have to ask the question, wow, was this something I said? Where did everybody go? It was the pandemic and the shutdown orders and the fact that we needed to be at home. So, but this job, I mean, it's been such a blessing. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Building team culture is very interesting via Zoom and GoToMeeting and Microsoft Teams. But if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's that you got to be in a position to pivot.
Yeah.
You be flat-footed. You got to be light on your feet. And we've done that as an organization. Blessed to be surrounded with some great team members who really work hard and are very committed to our mission. Um, so that's kind of my journey, and that's probably longer than Reader's Digest. But hopefully
Well,
it didn't put anybody to sleep.
well, something that was interesting to me is like, how did you find that transition from, like, say, you went from the for-profit space
Mhm.
into the not-for-profit space? Was that I guess, challenging mental shift, or did it just flow naturally for you?
Well, actually, so it's really I see myself as having worked in three sectors because I did for profit, then I was in the municipal sector, so the public sector, and now the not for profit sector. But I don't really feel like the shift had been was so dramatic. I mean, certainly, there's some things that are different in working for different types of bureaucracies, some with more sort of defined layers and defined kind of you can do this or you can't do that type elements. But I think one of the what how I've always tried to see it is by looking at the commonalities within each sector, and then that being connected with the my own sort of individual beliefs and personality dynamics. And I've always known about myself that equity was important, and also that salesmanship. You hear people say all the time, well, I'm not a salesperson, I don't like sales.
Mhm.
If you convince people to do things, you're selling them.
Mhm.
And I've always looked at the three different sectors in which I've worked, uh, in each of those sectors having an opportunity to make the business case for why something should be done.
Mhm.
And when I worked in the private sector and I did marketing and sales, I had to convince retail store owners why my brands made the best sense to showcase prominently and or to buy.
Mhm.
When I went to the governmental sector, I had to often make a case to a board or a commission or a council on using, fact-based data or fact-based information and appropriate data to prove the point of why the city should invest dollars in this infrastructure project or
Mhm.
this economic development project that was going to enable stores to be built and enable jobs to be created or retained or and so forth and so on. So either way you look at it, that was sales.
Mhm.
Now in the not-for-profit sector, um, we have to generate revenue for our organization and generate grants, generate financial gifts, but also generate fee-for-service contracting opportunities. We have to convince borrowers that they should apply for a loan, or potential borrowers that they should apply for a loan with Carolina Small Business Development Fund. It's all about convincing people based upon developing the proper business case.
Mhm.
And so I've always seen that as a commonality, regardless of which sector I've worked in.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And speaking of, like I said, some of the things that that you're doing now with the organization, or that the organization does, can you give us a little bit of a highlight of some of the, some of the major things that you guys have done, or that you've been able to accomplish with the organization, whether it be, in your 10 months that you've been there?
Sure, happy to. So first, a little bit about Carolina Small Business Development Fund, or on this interview, I might refer to it as CSBDF. Uh, but we are a 30-year-old organization. We started as the North Carolina Minority Support Center, and then evolved into the Support Center, and then rebranded ourselves in 2017 as Carolina Small Business Development Fund. We stand on three pillars: small business lending, small business advising or technical assistance, as well as policy and research. And we do what we do because we have great partnerships and financial relationships with large commercial banks, with philanthropic organizations, with local governments, and and also because small businesses borrow from us. So essentially, we exist to deploy capital in quote unquote underserved communities. We're chartered to do that based upon a charter we have with the United States Department of Treasury. And what that does is brand us and give us the certification to be a community development financial institution, or CDFI. That's the industry we're in. And really, what I like to say is sort of start where large commercial banks would stop in terms of small business lending. Large commercial banks are held to a federal regulation called the Community Reinvestment Act, or the CRA Act. And this was passed in 1977. And because of the language in that act, really the premise of the CDFI industry was born. In other words, banks were going to have to invest a certain percentage of their assets in quote unquote underserved communities. This country has a history, both institutional and non institutional, as it relates to practices that have marginalized certain communities. And recognizing this in 1977, the federal government passed this Community Reinvestment Act that basically said banks must invest a percentage of their assets in underserved communities, because prior to that, they had not been making these investments. They had been doing things like redlining, where they decided where they were going to do mortgages and where they wouldn't. Small businesses in these communities could not get access to debt in order to scale. Uh, there was just a lack of investment on the part of banks. So banks now have this regulation. They also have kind of the business dilemma of saying, okay, well, if I want to lend money to Terrell Turner Enterprises and he wants a $200,000 loan, it's going to take me the same amount of time underwriting that loan. It's going to take me the same amount of time with all of the administrative procedures and processes associated with that loan as it would if Kevin Dick Incorporated wanted a $5 million loan. And so banks basically decided, okay, we can meet the CRA requirements by partnering with organizations who have a business model that's more suited to lending or providing assistance in these communities. Hence the need and the worth of a CDFI. So a lot of small businesses think that, okay, they're going to look for credit or get capital. Okay, well, I'll go to that bank in my neighborhood, that large commercial bank, only to find out that those are not generally the types of loans that those banks do. And that's not a disparagement against the banks. It's just, but it's a fact of the matter is that from a business standpoint, doesn't really make as much sense.
Mhm.
So those banks work with CDFIs, and one of the things that I really want the Business Talk Library audience, particularly the small business owners, to know is that CDFIs are out here. There are probably about 10 throughout the state of North Carolina. And Terrell, promise you, I'm going to get to your question very directly in a second. I just thought that background was necessary. Um, but there are probably about 10 or so throughout the state of North Carolina. And one of the things that makes me very proud of Carolina Small Business Development Fund is that we are one of the few that is statewide. We've done lending in at least 70 to 75% of North Carolina's 100 counties. We also have done 59% of our lending to businesses owned by people of color, and another about roughly 40% to businesses owned by women. Another percentage, roughly 17%, to businesses in rural areas, and about 15% to businesses owned by veterans. So we've made a business of being in business with those entities that have typically been overlooked, that have typically not been able to access the capital that they need in order to survive. Now, enter the pandemic, 2020. One of the things that Carolina Small Business Development Fund has done in order to pivot how the organization really serves the community or communities is really have very intentional partnerships with municipalities and local jurisdictions. And we've used capital that we have been provided by those jurisdictions to in turn lend money on really favorable loan terms that probably would not be in place if not for the pandemic. And also provide specialized business advice and technical assistance relative to operating your business in a pandemic. So one of the things we've done this year that I'm very proud of is we've done about 270 loans to businesses throughout North Carolina, but we've also entered into the realm of grant making. So we partnered with some jurisdictions that said, you know what, we don't really want to do a small business lending program. We know that businesses taking on debt right now is difficult. We'd rather just do grants that businesses don't have to pay back. So on top of the 270 some odd loans we've done, we've also done what's now, I want to say, over 600 grants to small businesses throughout North Carolina. And we've deployed well over $10 million in capital. And when you hear $10 million, think about that in terms of average loan sizes being in the $25,000 to $30,000 range, and the average grant sizes being somewhere, maybe $10,000 to $15,000. So think about what $10 million means at those levels, right? So besides those initiatives with grants and loans, we've also done payment deferrals for some of our existing borrowers. We've done 2 months of interest only for some of our existing borrowers. So we've been busy, helping businesses. We've been, this is what we do. But like I said, we've pivoted a little bit, adjusted some. If we typically bake the pie this way, maybe we added a little bit of cinnamon and spice this year. But we've really, tried to provide on time and urgently needed service to small businesses.
Awesome. Now, with the amazing things that you guys are doing, and the resources that you offer, how can people find you guys online, or how can they get in touch with you on social media to take advantage of those resources you offer?
Great question. So I think I met you, Terrell, on LinkedIn. We've got a prominent LinkedIn presence. So you can find us, just search Carolina Small Business Development Fund, or just search Carolina Small Business. You'll find us there. Prominent presence on Facebook, Instagram, and I think we're tweeting. Yeah, I think we're Twitter too. And our website is carolinasmallbusiness.org. Simple. Carolina Small Business, all one word.org. And you'll find information about a lot of the programs and services that we have in play now. Another, because two other things I'm very proud of that we've launched this year are a small business needs assessment that can be done in less than 10 minutes online.
Wow.
And what happens when that is done by a small business is we are able to develop a customized business plan for, or I should say, customized recovery plan for small businesses that are looking to pivot and survive, not just survive, but thrive during and beyond the pandemic. So we ask specific questions in that small business assessment that lead us to form those conclusions about how we can best help you. So it's not just about the financial assistance, it's about the technical assistance and really the guidance we are providing businesses on how to best manage capital, how to best scale, and really how to, if necessary, change kind of their business model a little bit. For example, a lot of the borrowers in our loan portfolio are restaurants or customer facing businesses. Now, like barbershops, salons, the main street, so-called main street businesses.
Mhm.
We all know the kinds of struggles that they've had to endure, the loss of customer traffic. But, restaurants are pivoting, they're being inventive, the curbside delivery, the, partnering with the DoorDash and some of the other delivery services, maybe more than they had in the past. We had one sort of novelty shop out in the western part of the state, um, where shout out to Maggie's Mountaineer Crafts. They were one of these businesses that had a very significant tourist following, had a tourist shop, and they made a good part of a good living selling fudge. Now they're doing that online, not and they're doing that through mail order, and their business is still thriving. um, we've continued to be a sound and solid resources for businesses in underserved communities, but just maybe through a slightly different product mix. One of the things I mentioned partnerships. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the state of North Carolina Department of Administration. We are one of the co-administrators along with the Institute for Minority Economic Development. Shout out to the Institute. We're co-administering a grant program for businesses that are certified as historically underutilized businesses or certified as disadvantaged business enterprises with the state. And we have deployed $5 million in about 6 weeks through that program, through grants. So they're one of our partners. The Golden Leaf Foundation and North Carolina Rural Center. We've been a partner in an NC Rapid Recovery Program. That's a $75 million program that the state has made available for small business loans, and we've been doing loans as part of that. So we've been pleased to have them as partners. The state of North Carolina General Assembly has been a great partner. City of Durham, County of Durham, Duke University, City of Raleigh, Mecklenburg County, City of Charlotte. We've been engaged with all of these entities. And then I can't forget banks and foundations. We've gotten funding for for our organization, but also for lending capital from Wells Fargo and Fifth Third and Truist, PNC. I don't want to leave anybody out. Somebody will get mad at me. But Annie E. Casey, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, all of these entities support Carolina small business. Wood Forest Bank is another. So we've gotten a lot of good support from a lot of different sectors, and we continue to be very intentional and very purposeful about deploying capital where it's needed in order to achieve equity. And one of the things that needs to be impressed upon the audience is that there's a difference between equity and equality.
Gotcha.
Given equal resources is equality. Providing resources in the fashion that achieves a level playing field, which could sometimes mean that there's a disproportionate amount of resources that's provided to certain groups over others. That's equity. And so that's one of the things that Carolina Small Business Development Fund is squarely involved with.
Awesome, awesome. Well, definitely thank you for coming on the interview. But before we wrap up, one last question I'd like to ask. I mean, with all the great work that you've done from, your own journey, the work that you guys are doing to empower small businesses and business owners, what's one piece of advice that you would share with business owners?
What I would say is be open to pivoting. These are unprecedented times. And if you want to be, serious about operating your business long term, remember that business plan is a living, breathing document, and you may have to make some adjustments to it. The other piece of advice, you asked me to give one, I'm going to cheat and give two. The other piece of advice is don't be afraid to take on low cost debt. Obviously, in these unprecedented times, there is good reason to be afraid to borrow. But if you can get access to streams of capital, and I'm going to give a couple of very specific examples. In Mecklenburg County, we are managing the Mecklenburg County Emergency Stabilization Loan Fund. Loans up to $35,000 at I said 3% interest with 10 year repayment periods.
Wow.
And relaxed underwriting criteria. We probably still have about another 40 to 45 opportunities for those loans. Or if you're in Durham, 3-year, 3%, 10-year repayments, signature loans, no collateral. I said no collateral, no personal guarantee if you're in Durham.
Wow.
These are opportunities that are likely never going to happen again. So even though it's 3%, and I know in the case of Mecklenburg, and I believe in Durham as well, interest only for the first 12 months.
Wow.
So you're not going to get an opportunity to get access to capital that is that low cost and has such a liberal repayment period. It's very likely to happen, unlikely to happen again. Now, I did mention that we administer grants as well, but programs that provide grants to small businesses are few and far between. So my advice would be, one, be prepared to pivot, be prepared to revisit that business plan. Two, take advantage of all of the low cost capital with liberal payback terms that you can get now. And because if you intend to be around beyond the pandemic, and if you intend to grow your business, you're going to need capital to scale it. And then, I'm sorry, 3, take advantage of technical assistance programs too. Our small business assessment, gives the opportunity for you to get a one-on-one customized recovery plan. So take advantage of the resources that are out there. And we're not the only CDFI in North Carolina, but I know we're a good one, and we can be, perhaps a place that can really help your business and help you to fulfill your entrepreneurial objectives.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the show, giving us a little bit more about your background, about, what your organization is doing, and just a phenomenal resource because, as you said, I mean, we are living through unprecedented times, and small business, any type of business needs to be prepared to pivot and they need access to the resources that will help them navigate this stage of pivoting so they can continue to grow. So thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for coming on the show.
Terrell, thanks again for having us. If we can come back to talk more about some of the new products and services we have, we will be glad to come back. And I want to be thankful, especially in this season, for you and everything you're doing with the Business Talk Library, and really the information that you're making sure gets out to the marketplace is very important.
Thank you for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like our content, be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want to see more of our exclusive content, you can subscribe and become a member on patreon.com/Business Talk Library. Hey, the Business Talk Library is the place where business makes sense.